what can really happen when a power of attorney is drawn in your favor and somebody who's initiated that power of attorney is in the state of coma or is unconscious? Does it still hold ground?
So Niharika, in a power of attorney, like you said, we have two parties. We have the principal, that is the person who gives the power, and you have the agent who is the recipient of the power. So it could be a general power of attorney or a specific power of attorney, but a very important component for a power of attorney to remain valid is that both parties are of sound mind.
Right.
Now, unless a power of attorney actually stipulates that it would continue to remain valid, even if the principal was, say, mentally incapacitated, and it's really rare to come across such a document. So, in case like, the principal is in a coma or, something like that, then for that duration, the agent should not take any action under such power of attorney, because it would run the risk of being set aside and being treated as doing some action without authority. So I would urge someone to not act under such a power of attorney if the principal is in a coma or something like that.
Right, makes sense. Okay, also in a scenario, Malvika, where say the person who is the bank account holder is again himself or herself is in a comatose state or unconscious or hospitalized, and say the family is not joint account holder, they do not have access to that bank account. Is there a recourse for them? Can they, how should one go about a situation like that?
So, I understand that this is probably something which a lot of families are grappling with, in these uncertain times. But the only way in which an account which is solely operated by, say, the person who is, lying in the coma, it's not a joint account. The only way forward is by approaching the court to appoint a legal guardian for such a person. Now, unfortunately, there is no specific statute, governing the same. You have statutes which provide for the appointment of a legal guardian for people with disabilities or limited mental faculties, but nothing specific to somebody who is, lying in a coma. So the only thing that the family members can do is, apply to the court. In fact, in 2019, the Kerala High Court had laid down certain guidelines as to how somebody would proceed with this basis, the case that was before them. And it ranges from the applicants having to disclose all the properties and the assets of such person, and how they were going to be utilized to pay for the treatment of for anything else, and giving periodic updates to the court. So this is the way it stands as of today.
Yeah. So I think as a preemptive step, everybody should ensure that their family members are actually joint account holders in their bank account, right?
Well, whoever can do it should. I mean, that's what I would advise. That it just makes it a little easier to navigate when things get complicated. It just makes it a little simpler.
True. If there's a demise of a person who's a credit card holder and has outstanding dues, in such a scenario, can the family be held liable to pay up those dues?
So Niharika, see, I mean, credit card debt is not extinguished on the death of the person. The onus to pay the same actually transfers to the estate of the deceased. So I would advise anyone in such a situation that please inform the credit card company as soon as you can. It's very crucial. They will need certain details from whoever is the relative or next of kin of the deceased card holder to write a letter to them, or maybe enclose the death certificate and send it. Every credit card company has their own procedure. The only case in which somebody like a family member would end up being personally liable to pay this is if they were a joint, card holder with such deceased, person. Not otherwise. This is something which the estate would have to bear. The estate of the deceased, his or her assets or properties.
there are condominium societies banning people, domestic help guests, from actually meeting the
Yeah,
members of the society. And it's been
yeah.
pretty, one of the topics of discussion. So just want to know, is a society within their rights to do so?
So the society is within their rights to do so only if it is mandated by the state government or by BMC. They actually by themselves, in the absence of any such instructions or guidelines, they cannot actually take such arbitrary decisions and put out these sort of rules. Uh, to give an example, last year in June, there was a standard operating procedure which the Mumbai District Cooperative Housing Federation had put out, which gave detailed guidelines as to how societies need to take precautions, about the entry and exit of domestic help or visitors, or maids,
Right.
drivers, etc. And at no point, even in that, were they specifically prohibited from entering. So, any society which is actually flouting these norms, they, could very well be pulled up by the deputy district registrar of cooperative societies if it was brought to their notice.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Fair enough. And what about scenarios where you see individuals flouting norms? Like, say, for example, where the entire family is tested COVID positive, and
Right.
they still haven't stopped domestic help.
So, Niharika, actually, last month itself, the BMC has come out with a set of guidelines which, societies should observe when certain residents have tested COVID positive, which, is the sealing of the flat. I'm sure we're all very familiar with the procedure by now.
Right. Right.
But anticipating, or rather knowing that people were flouting this in the past, they have specifically said that a flat where even one person is COVID positive has to be sealed. Nobody can enter or exit, and that includes your domestic help. So it is very specifically mentioned by BMC. And if for example, for you, if you see someone who's flouting these norms, I mean, please complain to your managing committee, and if they are not taking any action, you can always approach the BMC. They have like their helplines and through their website. So that's the way forward for this.
And yeah, fair enough. And having said that, I think also people staying in the society should look into a scenario where somebody who's COVID positive should not be without any help. Because many times, people may not be in the state to,
Right.
arrange for basic food and, all of those things, which can make life really difficult.
Right. I mean, concessions can always be made in terms of, I mean, that those guidelines are fairly detailed, and they say that, you can keep something outside the house where someone can come and drop food. So they've contemplated, I mean, various situations. But the fact remains is that if there is someone who is COVID positive, it is not, I mean, responsible for somebody to be entering and, exiting the place.
What about
Yeah.
people who are using false RT-PCR reports? And
Yeah, it's appalling that people are actually trying and getting, I mean, they think that they can get away with this, and it's so irresponsible. I mean, one COVID positive person can literally infect up to 400 other people.
right.
So, I mean, if somebody still wants to go ahead and do the same, I mean, please note you're going to be booked under various sections of the IPC, the Disaster Management Act, the Epidemic Diseases Act, and I mean, the provisions could range from forgery, or, using a forged instrument as genuine, trying to spread an infectious disease, which is a danger to life, negligence, and the penalties for the same are imprisonment or fine or both. So, I mean, please keep that in mind.
The statutory limitation period with respect to a court case, would there be any relaxations in that regard because of
So the
COVID?
Supreme Court, yeah, so the Supreme Court had actually come out with an order last year where they had extended, the statutory limitation period for a certain amount of time. And very recently it was lifted because, everybody felt things were getting better, and courts were functioning, and physical courts rather. So, but as of, I mean, last week, we could say a couple of days back, the Supreme Court did come out with an order by which they have once again extended the limitation period for filing relevant proceedings under general and special laws with effect from the 14th of March until any further orders by the Supreme Court.
Would there be any tax benefits for donations made to organizations which are involved in COVID relief?
So if the organization is one which is notified under Section 80G of the Income Tax Act, yes, you would definitely get some tax rebates. Now, whether it's 100% deduction that you can seek, or 50%. I mean, I'm just talking very broadly, not getting into specifics. This is something that you would have to approach the organization and verify the same with them before you proceed to donate, if this is something that is of importance to you.
Could it be possible for a tenant to have the right for a waiver of the rent in such a situation?
So Niharika, actually last year in April, because of the economic hardships that everyone was facing, the state housing department had actually, they had issued a circular with instructions or sort of guidelines to landlords and property owners that, please give 3 months period to defer payment of rent, and do not take any sort of eviction action against your tenants. But having said that, after that period, this cannot obviously go on indefinitely.
Right.
So to seek waiver it cannot be a matter of right unless and until there is some provision in your lease deed or your leave and license agreement which actually provides for the same. So no, it cannot be a matter of right.
Right. All right. Thank you so much, Malvika. I think, all the answers that you gave us today will be really, really useful in these times.